For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle is so thick. Even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Here we go, episode 96. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you to sregear.com, to FishelPaddles.com, and to SodaPeakOutfitters.com for helping make this podcast possible. Today's episode is a great one. I got Buck Nelson with me on this episode. Buck is the ultimate adventurer. He has spent a career as an Alaskan smoke jumper and just an absolute adventure maniac's not the right word, but adventure madman maybe is the right word. Most down-to-earth, nice guy you can meet, and he has just done some spectacular adventure trips. We talk about his Mackenzie River paddle. We talk about living off of the land in both Alaska and Fiji and several other trips. He's got a website called bucktrack.com you can check out, but without further ado, here is Buck Nelson on episode 96 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. I was just looking before we joined here, and it was almost 2 years ago to the day. It was September 16th, 2022, that we first connected for our first episode. I think it was episode 53, if I'm not mistaken. So it's good to reconnect, and got a lot to catch up on. You've done a lot of trips since then. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Absolutely. Talk about adventures, and also I should mention I got my my daughter. My wife's putting my daughter to bed behind me, so we may hear some baby screaming as we go, but that goes with territory, I guess. But yeah, you've done some epic trips since we last chatted, and I'm looking forward to picking your brain about them. I mean, just the litany of trips that you've done, not just in the past 2 years, but over the course of should I say your career, your life, are just fantastic. And you got your website called bucktrack.com where folks can check out some of the trips you've done. But fill me in a little bit on some of the latest trips that you've done. I know the big ones that I'm thinking of, the Mackenzie River. You did the living off the land in Alaska, the Kayak River. Both of those rivers are Mackenzie's not near and dear to my heart. The Koyukuk is, but the Mackenzie's on the bucket list possibly. So, man, quite the litany. You've been a busy man.
Yeah, I forget. Last time we didn't talk about the Mackenzie trip. I think that happened since. Yeah, that was a big one, of course. And I just like a week ago or so, I did the living off the land trip up in the Brooks Range, and then, like you say, I paddled down the Canootie and down the Kayak to the village of Hughes, and let's see. I guess last winter I hiked across California, and I forget what we talked about when exactly, but I hiked across New Mexico the winter before, and I did a living off the land trip in Fiji like a year and a half ago, I guess. I don't think we talked about that.
No.
One interesting thing about that is I ended up on the island where they filmed Castaway.
Okay.
And so I was actually on that island. It was kind of fun to see the beach and everything from the movies. And I did some cooking in the cave from the movie. And I was fishing and collecting fruit and stuff. And one thing that happened that I'm sure people who didn't know me probably thought was a setup is a volleyball washed up on shore on that island. Yeah, but actually, I think it was a soccer ball. But one morning I was walking the beach there, and there was a ball there, so that was kind
ridiculous.
Of interesting. Yeah,
that's hilarious. Of course, that was going to be my next question: is did you find Wilson? And apparently, you did.
Well, that's what everyone said when I posted a picture. They said you found Wilson.
That's
Yep.
hilarious, man.
Yeah.
Man, that's a litany of trips. I guess I'd like to get to all of them, or at least a little piece of them. But let's just dive right in off of living off the land. So you had these two separate living off the land trips, one in Alaska and one in Fiji. Give me kind of the bare bones. I guess we could do either of them, or we could start with one of them. But give me like kind of the bare bones, what your goal was, what the trip was, how long it was.
Well, the Fiji one just was kind of a spontaneous trip. I was on my way to New Zealand, and I had a long stop over several weeks. I was hanging out in Fiji, and I was on an island, and they said, "You want to take a tour to the Castaway Island?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds really fun. I love that movie." And when we were there, I was walking around, and I was thinking, "Man, this is nice." And look out in the water, and it's full of fish, and there's coconut trees and probably some other tropical fruits and stuff. And I asked the guy, the guy with the boat, I said, "Do you think they would let people camp on this island?" And he asked around, and it took a long time. And I talked to the local chief, and he said, "Yeah, I mean, there's several islands. Take your pick." And so I actually tried a couple of other islands. But one interesting thing about Fiji is the local people are so nice. They knew I was out there living off the land, so they figured the way they would help me is to bring me food. And so it took me a long time to convince them how much I appreciated their help, and I wasn't going to allow myself to starve. Finally, the chief said, "You know what? If we put you on the backside of the Castaway Island, then you'll be able to get away from people. You won't see anyone." He was right. That was a good spot. And yeah, it was really interesting. It was another environment I was totally unfamiliar with. So, I mean, what do I know about opening?
What is the goal, or how do you do like what's the overall plan of these living off the land trips? You go out with a rifle and fishing gear, and that's it, or how does it work?
Well, on that trip, I didn't even have the idea until the guy said, "You might be able to camp here." And once I got the okay from the chief, ran back into the nearest city where you could purchase stuff. And I bought things like a machete and frying pan and fishing gear and a tarp and just a handful of things like that. The big aspect of that trip that made it a lot easier is it's tropical, right? So assuming you can get out of the rain and you can access some coconuts, you're probably going to not starve. But yeah, basic skills that the locals had, say like opening coconuts. Little children knew how to do that. I didn't, and it was much more difficult than I had anticipated. And in fishing, I mean, it's like fishing most places. Once you have it dialed, it usually goes pretty well. I didn't know how to fish from shore out in the ocean with a hand line. So I had a lot to figure out, but it was really interesting.
Man, it was really interesting. You went out there with no food, and you had in a completely new environment, no shelter, no tent, no gear. And
I did have a shelter. I had a little single wall shelter I was bringing to New Zealand, so I had a shelter. Yep.
Okay. And I hear
but
you.
But I did completely.
I hear you clicking your pen just a little.
Okay.
So in a completely new environment, no food, and you go out not even with a fishing rod, but with a hand line.
Yeah. Yep. And and then one thing I was doing is trying to find different kinds of fruits. I was exploring all over, trying to find papayas and trying to find mangoes. And I think I only found maybe 2 ripe mangoes. It was past mango season, and there weren't a lot of papayas, but I did manage to find a few. And there was a lot of coconuts, but coconuts was the one thing I was getting a little bit tired of. But I was only the whole thing was only like a couple of weeks, so it was interesting and it was well worth doing, but wasn't quite as epic as maybe some other adventures.
Man, a couple of weeks it sounds like a lot, but yeah, when you compare it to 50 days in Alaska, maybe it's a smaller bite. But I mean, did you have books about the local fauna and local fish, or how did that all play out?
You know what? I didn't, but one thing I did do is I got to know some of the locals, and I said, for example, I said, "Is there any fish that I might catch that are poisonous?" And they said, "Nope." And I said, "Is there any I wanted to try to catch some crabs?" And I said, "Is there any that are poisonous?" They said, "No." Although Google disagreed. Google had a couple of fish and a couple of species of crabs that were poisonous, but I suspect that the odds of me getting them were not high, or the locals would have had an issue with them. They seemed pretty confident. They were extremely friendly, and gave me demonstrations on like how to open coconuts with the machete or with a sharpened stick, and how to store them. And there was tons to learn, and I learned a lot. And I'm sure I still didn't know as much as a local 8-year-old kid or 6-year-old kid, but it was
How
an
did you
experience.
go about getting the crabs, and like what were you using for bait on your hand line, especially the first couple times when you're out there without much?
Yeah, they explained that too. They said one of the best baits of all is sardines. The hard part is I didn't have a proper sardine net. Like the locals, they would have a net one of those nets they swung above their heads and threw out. So I would have occasionally, when schools of sardines would come in, I'd be able to grab one or throw it up in the bank or something. So I didn't get to use a lot of sardines for bait. I used a lot of hermit crabs for bait. They'd be crawling around in their shells, and I would drag them out of their shells and bait a hook and throw it out there. And I think the locals would have caught a lot more fish and a lot faster, but I had a lot of time. And I think my big excitement is one day I had been catching little reef fish, and I hooked a shark or something huge. It just took off, and I was trying to hold on because I wanted to eat whatever it was, but it did finally get away. And then one of the local guys that I got to be friends with, he lent me a spear gun, which I was also very lame with. The locals were much more skilled with it, but I did get some fish with the spear gun, and it was. I pieced it together, and it was an interesting experience. And it was just fun to be on that island. It was fun to be on that island and to recognize places from the movie and stuff. I got a kick out of that.
Yeah, and I got to imagine just completely out of your normal element. I mean, you're an Alaskan guy, lots of trips in the Arctic, in the North, lots of trips, in the continental U.S. as well, lots of river trips. But man, the Arctic's about as completely different as it can get to Fiji.
Yeah, I did not know what I was doing. It's a more forgiving place, but it was interesting. I was going to spend another few days out there, but I got a infection in my foot, which is really common in the tropics. And I was just listening to a podcast with Tom Hanks, and the same thing happened to him. When he was on that island, he was kneeling down for the fire-making scene, cut his knee, and he ended up spending several days in the hospital. So I had to cut my trip short, but at least I didn't have to be in the hospital.
Oh, that's good. And
yeah,
how did you store up your food, or did you just catch it every day?
Yep. I had no way to store food. Probably the best way was coconuts were always available, right? So they were kind of naturally stored in the trees whenever I wanted them. But otherwise, things like fish, I just had to catch them and cook them and eat them. I had no good way to store that kind of thing.
Amazing. And how does that compare to, give me the kind of the bare bones of your most recent trip, which you said you just got back from not long ago, which was 50 days living off of the land in the Brooks Range of Alaska?
Yeah, that was a completely different thing. I had done a lot more planning for that, and it was an environment that I knew a lot better. I went. I had more gear than I did in Fiji, but I had just minimal gear compared to my Admiralty Island trip I did a few years ago. So I had one one shirt and no hatchet and no saw, and had like one cooking pot and one mug and one fork. So just very minimal types of things. I had a tent that would keep me dry. I had a shotgun, my old double barrel, to hunt game birds or for grizzlies who got a little overly confident. But like I tell people, things never go the way you expect they're going to go, right? You have a idea in your head that I think this is what it's going to look like, and this is what I'll see, and this is the resources I'll have. And some of it was like I imagined, and some of it was completely different. It rained a lot. It rained and rained and rained. I looked it up when I got home, and they say in that country there's something like 12 inches of precipitation a year. And in 2 weeks, I figured I got 13 inches, judging by the rain I dumped out of my cooking pot. And so the river, I was depending on fish. I was getting a lot of berries, and I was getting some roots and some leaves and things like that. But my real calories came from fish. So there was a stretch of 6 days where I couldn't catch any fish. And so I was just eating berries and roots and leaves and stuff. And that got a little bit tedious. But usually the fishing was good. Usually when the river was a reasonable level, I was catching just beautiful, nice big grayling and or char or dolly varden, depending on what you want to call them, or chum salmon. There was a few silver salmon, a few pink salmon. Yeah, it was good. And there was a lot of bears. There were a ton of grizzly bears, mostly coming to that river to get salmon. They were also depending on salmon for a food source, I'm sure.
Wow. Now I've done the Brooks Range is near and dear to my heart. When I was 17, I guess it would have been, maybe 18, did a 45-day backpacking trip in from the Hall Road and then up to Anaktuvik Pass and down from there. And man, it's just amazing country. And about the grizzlies, like you say, or what they say at least, and I'm wondering if you think this is true as well, that those interior grizzlies are a different animal than the ones on the coast, which is where you did your last living off the land, or one of your previous living off the land trips. Did you find that to be true, that the grizzlies in the Brooks Range in the interior there? I mean, you're a Fairbanks guy, so maybe not too much different, but that they're a little gnarlier, maybe.
Yeah, maybe they might be, just because there's less food, right? So they probably have to be a little more aggressive. If you're a typical brown bear where there's an infinite amount of salmon, you're probably going to be more likely to get out of the way if you run across a person. I didn't have any serious problems on this trip. The bears were pretty respectful. I had, as I tell my friends, I did have grizzlies run towards me fast a couple of times, but it was one of those deals where it was easy to misinterpret. It turns out in both cases, they kind of just happened to be running towards me. The one had run across my camp across the river, and I think this is what happened. And he was running in a panic, and he just happened to be running straight towards me. I don't think he even saw me till the very end. And similar with the other bear, but it's still exciting when you don't know what they're up to and what their intent is to see how everything's going to pan out.
Man, one of the biggest adrenaline rushes I've ever had was on that trip in the Brooks. We got what I call, I don't know what it was. What I call was like a bluff charge.
Yeah.
From a big grizz. Actually, it wasn't even a big grizz. It was like a young grizz, probably never seen people before.
Yeah.
And he was on a hill, kind of saw us, and we had eyes on him. It was a group of 5 of us. He runs down into a valley and then pops back up onto our hill. And at that point, we're like, okay, gather up, bear's getting a little closer. And he puts his head down and starts running at us, stops, I don't know, maybe 20 yards or so away, stands on his hind legs, wins us. At that point, I didn't really realize that he was winning us. I was kid and naive and not really understanding what was going on. But he stands up on his hind legs, shows us his teeth, Chris, just the gnarliest teeth. And then he puts his head down and comes at us again. And I think similar to your story, maybe he came at us and then veered off and ran away. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 yards, 10 yards in front of us. But boy, you want to talk about a pucker factor. That was, that got the adrenaline going, man. There was some cuss words flying when he ran the other way.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And I mean, if you look at just the odds are pretty good. But when it's happening, you know, you're in this situation and the grizzly's powerful and you don't know how it's going to pan out. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Makes great stories, but
that's for sure.
You might not hope for it to happen again.
Hey, it's Will here. Want to take a moment to let you know about today's sponsor, SREgear.com. SRE Gear is a family-owned and operated outdoor gear shop in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and they have everything you need for your next adventure, whether you're camping, backpacking, hiking, paddling, or just getting out there and exploring. SREgear.com has the gear you need to get you to those places you love. I recently picked up a new Garmin InReach from SRE. I needed a new communication device for the guided canoe trips I've been leading, and after talking through a few options with the owner, Nick, there, he helped me sort out what I needed and get squared away. And that's one of the things that sets SREgear.com apart is the unbeatable customer service. Call or email with any questions, and you'll talk with the owner, Nick, or someone there close to him. So before you go and buy any outdoor equipment from a big box store, be sure to check out family-owned and operated SREgear.com, and be sure to use the discount code WILL at checkout for 10% off your first purchase. That's discount code WILL at checkout for 10% off. SREgear.com. Great gear, great prices, unbeatable customer service. Hey, it's Will here. I want to take a moment to let you know about our show sponsor and partner, Fischel Paddles, makers of fine, handcrafted wooden canoe paddles. I spent a lot of time paddling rivers and lakes, and Fischel paddles are the best canoe paddles that I've come across. I use the Ray Special model myself, and I outfit all the guided trips that I run with Fischel paddles too, because I think they're the best. Each paddle is handmade by Greg Fischel at his shop in Flagstaff, Arizona, from a single piece of wood. What I love most is the shape and feel of the paddle. Other than being beautiful and efficient, it puts less strain on your shoulders and arms than a typical paddle would, while actually giving you more control and finesse with each stroke. Plus, the shape of the blade just feels right cutting through the water. All paddles are customizable from the type of wood, whether that's cherry, ash, or maple, to laser engravings, and my favorite, which is the leather strap that Greg pins around the shaft so that it doesn't get beat up as you run along the gunnels, prying off or doing the J-stroke in the back of the stern there. So go get yourself a Fischel paddle now and feel the difference. Use the code WILL at checkout. That's WILL to get a free wooden paddle hanger with any paddle purchase. That way you can show off and organize that new handmade paddle. Check them out at FischelPaddles.com. That's FISHELL paddles.com. Fischel Paddles, handcrafted wooden canoe paddles. And how about your food on this trip? I mean, 50 days is a long time. Were you storing any of it up, or were you just catching fish and eating fish as you caught it?
That's one thing I did to try to make it a little more difficult is on Admiralty Island, I brought a pressure canner. What's that?
Sounds difficult. I said, make it more difficult. Living off the land for 50 days sounds difficult enough to me.
Yeah, but I often have said that on Admiralty, one of the key pieces of equipment was that pressure canner. Because say like most native peoples, they have to have some way to store their windfall of food. And usually like in Alaska, it would be hanging fish up to dry. They'd have drying racks and they would be camping near there and they'd have people monitoring it. Or maybe if it was the winter, they would just put the seal meat out in the ice or something like that. So on Admiralty, I thought my best option, and in hindsight, I think it was to bring that pressure canner. So when there were times where the fishing was poor and I was having trouble getting meat, but the last time there was a windfall, say if I caught a halibut or I caught a bunch of salmon, or the time I shot a deer, I could can up a bunch of food so I could tide myself over for a week. And this time I did want to make it more challenging. I wanted to go super light. I paddled out on this trip, and so I had a little lightweight pack raft. I had a minimal amount of gear. So when the fishing was good, I would eat all the fish I reasonably could on that day. And if I saw it was going to rain, a lot, and I thought the fishing might go to pieces, I would try to catch enough fish for the next day and the next morning. And the conditions were cool enough so I could tide myself over for almost 2 full days that way. But I still, as I mentioned, I still had gaps where I couldn't catch any fish, and I had run out of fish. And we're pretty spoiled. We're spoiled in that we can pretty much eat whatever we want, whenever we want. And if you get hungry, you expect to get something to eat immediately. And you don't have to get something to eat immediately. You're okay if you're just eating a quart of blueberries and a few roots and a few leaves and stuff. That doesn't kill you.
Amazing. From my time in the Brooks Range, what I remember, and again, it was, I wish I will go back for sure. It's been high on the list to do another trip up there. But what I recall was the grayling fishing just being fantastic, and big ones. I mean, like trophy grayling on every cast. And again, at the time I was naive and didn't realize that those were trophy fish on every cast. But did you find that on your trip that the grayling fishing was real good?
Yeah, I would say the typical grayling was about as big as any grayling most Alaskans catch, unless it's somebody who makes a habit of going into the wilderness, right? Like around Fairbanks, there's some good grayling fishing, but there's quite a few people fishing grayling too, so you don't see those big ones. I was catching really nice big grayling. And in the fish I was mostly targeting probably was Dolly Varden, was char. So I got a huge kick out of catching them as well. It was a fun trip.
And how about you mentioned, I think, that you had a shotgun for some upland game. Did you find any birds or any meat other than the fish?
Another example of it never going the way you think. I've spent a lot of time in the interior of Alaska, and usually if you spend enough time traipsing around, you'll find a few grouse, and depending on where you are, a few ptarmigan. And when waterfowl season opens, if you're along rivers, you're almost certainly going to see ducks and geese and stuff. Well, before waterfowl season, I saw quite a few geese, not quite as many ducks, but I could have shot ducks and geese. And when season opened, I didn't have a single opportunity to shoot at a duck or a goose. And unbelievably, I didn't see a single grouse or a single ptarmigan. It's like, it's impossible that I didn't, but I didn't. So you never know. The one big positive was the berry picking was really good. And that was huge on this trip when the fishing was bad. I could go out and I might be getting rained on, but I could pick pretty much all the blueberries. Not all the blueberries I wanted. I could pick all the blueberries I wanted. And there were a lot of other kinds of berries too. Salmon berries and crowberries and bearberries and high bush cranberries and low bush cranberries and Nangoon berries or Nagoon, one of the two. Yeah.
I also remember the salmon berries when I was in the Brooks were just going off for one section. That might be the best tasting berry in the world. It's like a orange creamsicle. So good.
Yep. They're like you say, they're really unique as well, right? They don't taste like any other berry that I'm familiar with.
No, I agree. What was the highlight of this trip? Living 50 days off the land in the Brooks Range.
You know what I like is I am a lone wolf and a hermit at heart, and I like to get into the wilderness and I like to see no people. So I went for 41 days straight without seeing a single person, and I love that. On the 41st day, a couple of fishermen came floating down the river, and so I had a chat with them, and it's fun to talk to people. I like people just fine, but I like being a hermit too. So that was really fun. That was, I broke my old record by a long way of not seeing people. And that was the biggie probably. I got a kick out of that.
That's great. How about the the paddle on staying kind of in the Brooks Range, the paddle on the Kayak River?
Yeah, that was one I've been looking at for years. I took a shuttle. There's a shuttle that goes up the Hall Road, up the Dalton, and I took that shuttle up to the Kayak River Bridge. And one of the unknowns on that trip was it was early in the season, first week of June, I guess, and I wasn't sure. Like some of those rivers, they have ice frozen across them until pretty late in the year, and I didn't really know what it was going to look like when I got there. It turned out this year in that spot, it wasn't an issue. Ice was not an issue on the Kayak, and it was a good time of year to do it. Sometimes the Kayak is so shallow, you have to be out of the boat a lot, pulling your boat, and there was enough water, so I stayed in the boat almost the entire time. So it was good conditions. Again, being a lone wolf, I enjoyed it because I didn't see a single person the entire time from the Hall Road to the village of Hughes. Not one person. It was pretty country. I did some fishing there too. Unlike the Brooks Range, where it rained and rained and rained and rained, it didn't rain a drop on me until I was just outside of the village of Hughes. Never know what's going to happen as far as weather or animals or anything else. There's a lot of moose there. There's quite a few bears, not quite as many bears, but pretty country as well. More of an interior river, not quite as dramatic a mountain scenery and whatnot, but I like all the different ecosystems, right? They're all dramatic and beautiful in their own way. So I got a big kick out of it. Stop by a hot springs. There's a hot springs along the way.
That's awesome. How long was this trip? And it was in a pack raft, is that right?
In a pack raft. It was a much shorter trip. It was a 10-day trip and like 13 days total, including logistics coming and going. When I got to the village, I had a ticket, but since I was off the grid and I didn't know what day I would be flying, I had to fly space available. So I ended up flying to the next village and just camping there one night and then flying home from there. But yeah, it worked pretty good. And it was an inexpensive trip because I could take that shuttle and then fly, like they say, the mail plane, just the village to village mail planes back home. And yeah, it worked good. It was fun.
That's great. Yeah. I remember reading in the book, the guidebook for the Yukon River, Paddling the Yukon and its tributaries, about the Kayak River. And that one had always piqued my interest too. Yeah. It's real windy, real, remote, and lots of wildlife, at least from what I've heard.
Yeah. But when I was first thinking about doing that paddle, I was going to paddle it all the way down to the Yukon. And I read some accounts. Apparently, the stretch I did of the actual kayak, there was a pretty good current. It was pretty good going, but apparently it slows down a lot. It gets really windy and really slow with huge oxbows. And if you're the kind of person, and you might be, if you have a lot of patience, that would probably be a good paddle. But I think for impatient people, it might be a little painful.
Come on, Buck. You can't say you're impatient when you go 50 days living off the land.
Yeah. I guess I'm not that impatient.
And how about the Mackenzie River? You've done all of these big river trips. You've done the Mississippi, which is what first put me onto you when I was researching my Mississippi River trip in 2017 is when I did it. I came across your website, which at the time, there wasn't really much out there at all on the Mississippi. Since then, it seems like it's exploded. And I don't know how much of that is just because I'm kind of dialed into it, or how much of it is it has actually exploded. I think maybe both things are true.
Yeah, it has actually exploded. I know when I was looking at it, there was almost nothing online, almost nothing. I think I found like maybe 3 accounts of people who'd paddled the Mississippi. Other people had, but the internet was extremely different now. Now I'm sure I haven't looked, but there's got to be a Facebook Mississippi paddle or page, right?
Oh yeah,
I think I have
absolutely.
seen it actually. Yep.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, that Mississippi River Paddlers Facebook page is kind of like the hub, the community hub of through paddlers. There's one for the Missouri River as well, and yeah, lots of resources, lots of people chatting. Yeah, which has its pluses and minuses.
Right. I remember on the Mississippi, I had ordered paper maps. There was no Gaia, and I don't think anyone had mapping. No, I don't think anyone had mapping GPSs there. So I had the first set of guidebooks down to Cairo, I think, the river charts, and below that, the second set didn't arrive, and so I had like a state highway map. And you can't see anything hardly. So I would just go till I guessed I was near some town and, jump out of the boat and walk up to a gravel road. Yeah, it was completely different. Some ways, like you say, it was more of an adventure, but it was also more of a hassle.
Yeah, exactly. So you've done the Mississippi, you've done pretty much most of the Yukon from one of your Alaska paddles. Maybe three quarters or so of the Yukon? Maybe more?
Yeah, less than that, maybe. I maybe done half. I would have to look at a map, but probably half.
Yeah, that's a big river too, which I've been on as well, and I've done the entire Yukon. Which, man, that was a fantastic trip. But talk to me about the Mackenzie, the longest and largest river of Canada, the land of rivers.
Yeah, that was a really interesting paddle. I had hiked the Continental Divide Trail, and a couple of years ago, I kind of like to do long distance trips, and I thought it would be fun to try to cross Canada in one season. But a hiking friend of mine from the PCT, her trail name is Wyoming, she always wanted to hike the Great Divide Trail. And I was looking at the map and I thought, you know what, if we hike the Great Divide Trail 1 year, then the next year I could maybe do a paddle to the ocean. So that's what we did. We hiked the Great Divide Trail and we were extremely lucky. A lot of years recently, it's been smoky, but it was just a clear summer, spectacular scenery. It was the best.
Sorry to interrupt you. Remind me of the Great Divide Trail, the start and ending, or kind of the general route of that one.
The Great Divide Trail starts on the U.S. border at Waterton Glacier Park. It starts right at the monument where the Continental Divide Trail ends, starts right at the boundary marker, and then basically runs north along the Canadian Rockies, runs past like Banff, and past like Lake Louise, and basically through Jasper. And then Jasper was kind of the traditional finish, but in more recent years, it's been extended north. So we went all the way to Kakwa Lake. And the whole thing, I don't know, maybe like, I'd have to look, maybe like 750 miles. But what makes it really special is it's just breathtaking scenery day after day after day. It is really impressive. Both Wyoming and I have hiked a lot of long trails, and we both agreed that per mile, it beats all the others. It's really impressive. Yeah.
I have to imagine a lot of altitude and a lot of elevation too, right?
Yep. And a lot of wildlife. We saw bears and sheep, and not as many elk as we thought, and deer, and lots of wildlife. It was a great hike. At any rate, so we did that hike a couple of years ago, and then last summer I started at Jasper and paddled north and east, I guess, down the Athabasca River, and then across Athabasca Lake and down the Slave River, and across Great Slave Lake, and then down the Mackenzie River to the Arctic Ocean.
Wow.
And finished in late July. And that was a big undertaking. Got some of the smoke that we avoided the summer before on that trip. Had a lot of beautiful sunny days and had some days where it was just crazy smoky. I've fought a lot of fires, so it wasn't that big of a shock to me. But there were days it was so smoky that when I was out in the middle of the river, I would get disoriented because I couldn't see the shore and I wasn't sure where I was going. Yeah.
Oh, cow. I remember flying into Yellowknife twice, I believe, and coming down and seeing Great Slave Lake. And man, that's a big body of water.
That is yeah, and that was one of the most intimidating aspects of the paddle, of course, is how it is on that big water when the wind comes whipping along. You have to really be heads up and really conservative and not get too far out from shore and be realistic on the dangers. A couple of friends of mine did that same paddle the year before. And they got caught. They got pinned down by wind on Great Slave Lake for days. But I did a lot of paddling at night. I would watch the weather reports. Have you done that on some of your long paddles? Have you paddled at night? Yeah.
Yeah. The Yukon specifically, just with, the midnight sun, 24-hour sunlight, it's why not? Right.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's kind of fun to be out in the water at night, and it's not night, and there's usually a lot less wind. Yeah, it's a win-win. So I did a lot of paddling at night, and I did have to wait out, I think, a full day on Great Slave Lake, and I had to wait out a few hours and many stretches for the waves to die down. And I stayed pretty close to shore. It was funny when I got to the coast. I was talking to some local villagers and super nice people. They invited me up to their camp, and I talked to this young guy who was a whaler, and they gave me some smoked fish and things like that. And I still didn't have a solid plan as to how I was going to get back home. And they said, you know what, when you get down to the coast, when you get to the village, just talk to people. Somebody will offer you a ride. So I got a ride on the first stretch, but the guy who gave me a ride, he was, I think, a Czech guy, super nice guy, an adventurer kind of guy, right? Driving all over, exploring the world. And he asked me what I've been doing. And I told him, he says, wow, that sounds really good. And he says, that was downstream then? I said, yeah. He goes, wow, then it was easy. I said, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of easy, but there was times it wasn't easy. But compared to going upstream, it was easy, that's for sure.
And what were you paddling on this trip? And Lone Wolf again? And how long?
I started mid-May and finished almost at the very end of July. And I was pushing pretty hard. I was paddling pretty big days, not like I was trying to set a record, but I was moving along pretty good. And I had an inflatable kayak, a fairly fast inflatable kayak with a skeg on it, and it's got one of those drop stitch floors and stuff. So it was a good boat. It was pretty fast, and it was easy to fly with. So I think it was a good choice for that trip. What did you paddle on the Mississippi?
I started in a Old Town Penobscot. And then funny enough, when I got to Winona, Minnesota, we were chatting before we started recording here. When I went to Winona, Minnesota, I happened to stumble upon a music festival there called Boats and Bluegrass right on the river. And I was like paddling up and I heard music in the distance. I was like, what is that? And then I show up and of course, it's a music festival. And I didn't need a ticket for it because I didn't come from the road. I came the back way from the river. So I crashed that, and I've been back to that one almost every year since. But also on that stay when I was in Winona, I just busted my paddle that day, and I was looking for a new paddle, and I was staying with like a local family who I met at Itasca on the first day I started the trip. There, I met a guy and his son there, a teacher and his son, and they were out camping, like the last day before his son went back to school. And he said, yeah, when you make it to Winona, if you make it to Winona, look me up and I'll bring you some beers or something like that. And so I gave him a shout when I got into Winona, and he ended up letting me crash with him and his family for 3 or 4 days. And it just so happened that the same weekend I was there, the same weekend that this music festival, Boats and Bluegrass, was going, which I'm leaving to tomorrow to go to this weekend. I think it's like my maybe 7th or so year going.
Wow.
But I guess maybe that's not right, but somewhere along there. And there happened to be a factory defect Winona canoe sale that weekend. And so just by happenstance. And so the guy took me to the thing. I was just looking for a paddle. And then because Winona is a relatively small town, he knew the owner of Winona Canoe Company, Mike Chiganowski, I believe is his name. And so he introduces me to the owner there. And the owner's like, "You're doing what? Paddling the Mississippi?" And so he's like, "Well, tell you what, come back tomorrow. I'll give you a tour of the factory." And so I come back, he gives me like a whole 2-hour tour of the factory. And then at the end of it, he's like, I got this boat here. What take it for a spin tonight and tell me what you think tomorrow. I was like, geez, okay. So I leave the shop with a brand new fast Winona Prism solo canoe. Wow. And I come back the next day, and he didn't give it to me for free, but about as close to free as you can get on a nice boat like that.
Nice.
So I left the Old Town Penobscot with the family I was staying with, and I finished out the trip in the Winona canoe, which was, I think, one of the perfect boats for it. Super sleek and fast.
Nice. Yeah, it makes a big difference what kind of boat you have. How about in the Yukon? What were you paddling?
The Yukon, funny enough, I was living in South Dakota at the time, and it had been maybe a year or 2 years since the Mississippi trip. And I text the guy who I had left the boat with, the Old Town Penobscot. I was like, "Hey, I hope you've gotten some use out of that boat, but I'm actually headed up to Alaska, and I'm wondering if I could come pick that boat back up from you." So he had it for a year or 2 years, and I ended up taking that same boat back up to the Yukon. So we did it in the Penobscot. Fine boat, not the fastest boat, but hauled the gear, and it worked well for us.
Did you leave the boat at the end, or what did you do with the boat?
Yeah. We the whole time we were paddling, we were kind of concerned about it, and everyone we talked to was like, "Oh, you're never gonna be able to sell it. You're never gonna be able to get rid of it. It's a boat graveyard down there, blah blah blah." So we were a little bit concerned about it, but first guy we talked to down there, I think we sold it for $100, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I would absolutely love it. I'll use it as a moose hunting boat, and we'll haul it out on the ice and throw a moose in it and drag it back." And I was like, "Yeah, perfect." So yeah, we sold it for
there you
$100
go.
At the end of the trip.
Good. That was a win-win.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
both. Him and you. Yeah, good.
100%. Explore the beautiful and rugged Wyoming backcountry with Soda Peak Outfitters in Moran, Wyoming, just down the road from world-famous Jackson Hole. SodaPeakOutfitters.com is the team to talk to get off the beaten path and into an unforgettable wilderness experience. Nestled in the heart of the greater Yellowstone area, Soda Peak calls Bridger Teton National Forest and the Teton Wilderness home. They specialize in guided and DIY fishing and pack trips into some of the most pristine and remote wilderness and water that the lower 48 has to offer. Pack trips by horse, mule, or llama make getting deep into the rugged backcountry doable and makes it a Western adventure in itself. I know one of the trips that I'd love to do is their thoroughfare fishing trip, where with a horse pack team, they take you into the headwaters of the famed Yellowstone River to fish and explore over 5 days. Untouched water, rising trout on a summer morning. Yeah, that sounds right up my alley. They also offer a single-day guided fishing trips as well as trail rides and more. Their pack trips are a great way to disconnect with civilization and reconnect with nature and the mountains. Charles is one of the owners there and the guy to talk to. He can help you tailor a custom trip or get you signed up for any of their classic adventures. Check them out at SodaPeakOutfitters.com. That's soda like the drink, peakoutfitters.com. Or give Charles an email at charles@SodaPeakOutfitters.com and use code BR2024 at checkout for 5% off any trip you take with Soda Peak. That's BR as in Buffalo Roamer 2024. Experience true Wyoming wilderness with Soda Peak Outfitters. The Mackenzie, though, how does it differ from both the Yukon and the Mississippi? I mean, I would imagine those are the most comparable rivers just in terms of scale of river. It's a big, wide, kind of slow rolling river, right?
Yeah, one odd thing is on the entire trip, did I see one boat? I either saw one paddle boat or zero paddle boats the entire summer. I'm trying to think. You know what? I think I saw one young couple who were paddling just the Mackenzie, but they weren't out on the water yet. It was amazing how few paddlers there were. Yeah. And it was also amazing how many long stretches there were where there were villages where I didn't see villagers out like checking nets. It must have been like in between fishing season and before hunting season. And I suppose they don't go burning gas that they don't need to. But again, on that trip, the villagers were extremely friendly. Local people tend to want to know, what's going on and, who's paddling by and stuff. And similar thing to your the people helping you, like one town I was arriving at, a guy was towing a boat, somebody's boat that was broke down, and you could see him looking at me. He was dying to know what I was up to, so he came over. And I told him, he says, hey, my I think his brother-in-law's house, it's that house right there. Stop there. I'll tow this boat to the guy, and I'll come up and meet you there, and he'll give you a beer. And then you can come over to my house, and we'll cook you dinner, and you can do laundry and get a shower and stuff. And, yeah. And let's see, what else? Less resupplies maybe than like the Mississippi or the Missouri. It was kind of a different experience. There were places like, in one place there was kind of a shortcut across this lake, and there had been a lot of big forest fires, and they were closing like roads and towns and stuff. So when I came up on that area, I didn't dare contact any authorities because I thought they would tell me you can't come through at all. So there was this one place, this one shortcut that goes through this lake. And the person who wrote the guidebook said, definitely call the locals and see what water conditions are like. I didn't want to do that because I was afraid they'd send me home. But I got to that lake. The lake was way too shallow, and it was pretty tedious. You know how it is, floundering through mud and trying to drag your boat and stuff. So that was one different aspect. And like we're talking about nowadays, say like the Missouri or the Mississippi, it's documented so well. There's tons of information. There was one stretch of river on the Athabasca where I knew there were a bunch of rapids, like serious rapids. And it was really interesting how difficult it was to determine how serious they were. Because some people think, I'll go for it, and if they're not killed, it wasn't that big of a deal, right? They'll say, well, I made it. It's not that big of a deal. And it was really difficult to find out. And finally, I got on a Jasper Facebook paddling group, and I said, has anyone ever paddled that? Because I can't find anything out about it. And a river guide said that he had paddled it once, and he said it was really, really sketchy. And he said, I do this for a living. And the first rapids is a class, I think it's a class 5 rapids. Because I saw a guy who had decided to run it in a canoe. And the lodge just downstream said, as far as they know, he's the only guy who's tried it and survived in a canoe. Yeah.
That sounds gnarly.
And so in that, So in that particular stretch, it was a long stretch of rapids, and the guide said, there's a lot of places where you couldn't line the boat and you couldn't scout, right? So you would come around a corner, there'd be gnarly rapids, and you'd be totally committed. And that sounded like really not a good idea to me. And so I hiked 200 miles around that stretch of river to avoid those rapids. And then there was another place in the Slave River where it's a similar thing, where there's famous killer rapids, and I walked just 25 miles that time. But I did walk or paddle the whole thing.
Holy cow. 200-mile portage to avoid like a, small few mile section. Man, that seems to me like it would be like demoralizing.
It wasn't too bad. It was just a pure road walk. There was nothing dramatic about it. It wasn't walking through beautiful forest. It was just plodding down a road. And my friends who had done the trip the year before, they hooked me up with another kind river angel, a guy who helps paddlers. And he happened to be shuttling a Polish guy's boat up to the next town, that same stretch that day. So I got there just in time. So he hauled my boat, my gear up too, and I just backpacked it.
Funny.
Yep.
When my buddy and I we did the Yukon in 2018, when we were, trying to get details and figuring things out. At first, the plan was to do the Mackenzie. And so we were kind of scouting it out, the second Mississippi or Missouri, depending on what your view is, the longest river in North America. And then you got Mackenzie, number 2, Yukon, number 3. And so we figured out, I've done the Mississippi, let's do the Mackenzie. And, started, calling around and kind of asking people about it, trying to get details. And I remember I called one outfitter up there, kind of told him what we were thinking of doing. And he goes, yeah, the Mackenzie, it's a fine river, great river. But have you ever heard of the Yukon? Do you like mountains? I was like, yeah. He's like, it's flat and muddy here. That was enough to make me think twice and start looking west.
Some places were definitely flat and muddy. Some places were just, what most people would consider tedious scenery. The upper part, like on the Athabasca, it starts in Jasper National Park. That part's really scenic. And there's some nice mountain ranges further down. Yeah, it's not, it's not as spectacular as the Rocky Mountains proper, that's for sure. And somebody said this is just a windy, horrible nightmare. That was their experience. There was plenty of wind. I thought it was a great adventure. It's like any adventure, right? Sometimes there was the horse flies, for example. The horse flies, the moose flies at times were absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. I've never seen anything like it in my life. That kind of thing probably would have driven most people completely bonkers. I have pretty good tolerance towards them. There were plenty of mosquitoes at times, but again, it's so great when you set up your tent in the evening and you crawl in and you're completely insect free.
It is the best. Yep. What was the river and the scenery like as you worked your way north closer to the Arctic Ocean?
Well, there was when I hit the Mackenzie proper, I hadn't done an excessive amount of research. I mean, I had a basic idea how long it was going to take and how I was going to do it, but I didn't spend a lot of time looking at videos and stuff to see what kind of scenery there would be. And there was some pretty nice mountain scenery on the Mackenzie as well. Not like giant mountains crowding the river, but just nice mountains in the not too far distance. In places I found there was fossils and mostly associated with old coal. And there were some nice little villages along the way. And I don't know what to tell you.
How about wildlife on that trip? Did you run into any, or was it pretty sparse with the smoke and just the nature of the river? Or?
You know what? It was a good wildlife river. Up high, I saw sheep and I saw elk, and still pretty high, I saw wolves 2 or 3 times. And I am super lucky on seeing wolverines. I am really lucky on seeing wolverines. And one night on this trip, I was paddling in the middle of the night, and I looked up on this bluff, and there was a wolverine trotting along the face of this bluff. And one time, it happened twice in one day, where wolves were standing up on high bluffs above the river and howling and barking at me. And
Wow.
somebody just suggested recently, where did they see photos of? Maybe on my YouTube video, they suggested maybe they were dogs. They were definitely not dogs. But the one of them, I saw her pups, and she hustled the pups out of the way. And then she followed me downriver for a mile or two, a long way. And when I would turn around, she would hide, but she wanted to make sure I got completely out of the country and I wasn't going to hurt her pups. So that was cool. I saw a lot of musk oxen, got some really good looks at them. Some of the locals said that I started seeing them a long way from the coast. And some of the locals said not too many years ago, there were no musk oxen there at all. They were an animal that moved in. Now there were a lot of them. I saw quite a few moose. I saw a few bears, but not a lot of bears. There were a lot of wolves in that country, though. Almost every place I landed, it seemed like if there was any mud around, wolves had patrolled through.
Man, those are majestic animals, aren't they? Just the way they move.
Yep. And I saw one beluga when I got near the coast, and I saw some seals near the coast. And one remarkable thing is, say on this trip in the Brooks Range I just got back from, I would characterize it as unseasonably cold and wet. It was pretty chilly a lot of the time. And on the Mackenzie, some of the Mackenzie, it was even farther north, right up on the coast, but it was warm a lot. A lot of it, even when I was on the Arctic coast last summer, I was standing there in my shirt sleeves with the wind blowing off the Arctic Ocean, and it was warm. Wow. And the weather always changes. It certainly wasn't like that this year in the Brooks Range. It was pretty chilly.
Yeah, I believe that, especially the time of year.
Yeah. Right.
Last kind of trip I'll hit on here, and then I'll let you run. Not too far from now, but I saw on your website one that kind of piqued my interest. Was the Minnesota border route trip. That was several years ago at this point, but tell me about that trip. I mean, that one sounds awesome. I mean, going through Voyageurs National Park, through the Boundary Waters, those are two, what's the right word? Crown jewels of the canoeing world, maybe?
Yeah. I always wanted to do that grand portage. That always appealed to me. It's always fun to do, big, difficult things. And I wanted to do it while I still had the capability. And then I had read, they call the paddle different things, and I forget which is the most common. There's something like the Voyageurs border route or something like that it's called, that runs along the international boundary, basically across the Boundary Waters and Voyageurs National Park. And then I was looking at the map, and I found some account, I think, of somebody who had done the Rainy River the opposite way. But I thought it'd be fun to start at Rainy Lake and paddle up the Rainy River and go all the way across Voyageurs National Park and all the way across the Boundary Waters, and then do the Grand Portage to Lake Superior. And then I was thinking about how I was going to get home to my parents' farm. And I always wanted to hike the Superior Hiking Trail. And I said, I'll hike the north shore of Lake Superior and the Superior Hiking Trail. And when I get to the end, I'll just keep walking to my parents' farm. So it ended up, which is, of course, my route there took me along the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. So, yeah, that was a fun trip. It was a good mixture of paddling and hiking and a lot of wild country and a zillion portages. And it was on that trip, I bought a new Kevlar, a single paddler boat. And that was so nice weight wise to be able to, most of the trip, I single portaged once I had some of my food eaten up, saved me a lot of time.
Man, yeah, that sounds fantastic.
But yeah, it was good.
I've always wanted to do the Superior Hiking Trail. I mean, I don't know what shore of Superior it's on, but the North Shore of Superior is just stunning. And I think it's kind of an unsung, unheralded place, and maybe even an unheralded trail for how beautiful it is.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's really impressive. I love the North Shore. Yeah, there's nice camping and nice views, and I happened to be there during the height of the colors, and it was really fun. And then on that trip, like say if I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail or something, I try to stick pretty much to the official trail. And on that trip, like if I was walking along on the Superior Hiking Trail, and I was looking at the map and it looked like a good place to walk along the lake, I would drop down and walk along the lake, and then, go back up to the trail, whatever seemed fun. Yeah.
Beautiful. And
It's
tell me
always fun
about
to have options.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about the Grand Portage, Grand Portage. I know it's got like historical context, but what exactly is it again?
Well, that's like the voyageurs when they're hauling furs from the interior of Canada and in the U.S. They would follow that route that I was paddling, but at the end, that river gets so gnarly. The rapids are so bad; it was almost certain to destroy their birch bark boats. So I think it's an 8-mile portage, and they would carry just enormous, giant loads and portage that 8 miles to Lake Superior. And then I think they kept paddling east on Lake Superior. But obviously I had a much, much lighter load, and it's a good thing because the kind of loads they carried would have killed me. But it wasn't quite as difficult as I thought it was going to be. I would just pick up all my stuff. I was single portaging, and I'd walk as far as I could, and then I would take a break and keep doing it. And if you just keep doing that, eventually you've done 8 miles. So, it was a big deal, but it was completely doable.
That's neat, Buck. That's neat. What do you got coming up here? I assume you're hunkering down a little bit for a Fairbanks winter, and I imagine you got some trips and some ideas rolling around the back of that head.
Yeah, first thing I'm going to do is go back to Minnesota and visit the family and do a little deer hunting. And I still haven't actually figured out what I'm going to do this winter. I am going to New Zealand fishing with a buddy of mine I went with a couple of years ago, an old smoke jumper buddy, but I'm not sure what I'll do in between. I haven't really decided yet. But I tell people that a lot of times I don't like to divulge my plans, even if I do have them. In this case, I don't have any firm plans, but I always like to change my plans in the spur of the moment. Otherwise, people go, "Hey, I thought you said you were going to do such and such." So I like to stay flexible. I like to kind of play it close to my chest.
That sounds smart. You got your website, bucktrack.com. You have a YouTube channel where lots of these adventures are posted. I haven't had the chance to go through your YouTube channel yet, but lots of these trips that we talked about are on there, right?
Yep. A lot of them, not all of them, but like the Lewis and Clark trip and the Mackenzie trip are on there, and that Living Off the Land, Admiralty Island, and there's a lot of them on there.
Great. And you still have books and other stuff on your website, or what do you got up there?
Yep. On my website on the order page, I got 3 books and I guess 3 videos, and a lot of it, like the videos now, times are changing as we were talking about. So a lot of it is available streaming on Amazon, and my books are on also as well as paperback. They're Kindle and audio, and so people have a lot of options.
Great. And is bucktrack.com the best place to go for that stuff?
Absolutely. Yep.
Wonderful. Well, Buck, thanks for taking the time to chat again, man. It was great to reconnect.
All right. Thank you, Will. Yeah, always good talking to you.
And there you have it. That is episode 96 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Buck Nelson. His website, bucktrack.com. Thank you to SREgear.com, to Fischel Paddles, and to Soda Peak Outfitters for helping make this podcast possible. Go check out BuffaloRoamer.com if you want to learn a little bit more about me or join me on a river trip. I should have 2025 river trip dates coming sometime in October here. The dates listed, so check those out. Would love to get out on a river adventure with you. If nothing else, get outside, get some fresh air, take it easy. See you downriver.